Imagine discovering you are pregnant and realizing the father of your child must never know. Imagine standing in silence, heart pounding, as you overhear a secret so devastating it rewrites everything you thought you knew about your husband, your marriage, and your future. That night I hid the truth in my trembling hands and listened as a doctor revealed why the most powerful man in my world could never have children, a revelation that would change both our lives forever. What you are about to hear is going to leave you speechless. Kindly hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet, and let me know where you are watching from. Stay with me because the final twist is something nobody could have predicted, not even my husband, Stephen Castellano. This is how a woman's decision to hide a pregnancy saved her life and revealed a secret that changed everything in New York. This story will teach you a powerful lesson. Never assume you know everything about the person you married. Never believe that silence means ignorance. And never underestimate what a woman will do to protect her child. I was staring at the positive pregnancy test in my bathroom, my hands shaking, my heart racing, my mind trying to process what this meant, what this would change, what this would cost me, because I knew with absolute certainty that I could not tell my husband Stephen about this baby, not yet, maybe not ever. And if you stay with me, if you listen to this whole story, you will understand exactly why. I married Stephen Castellano when I was 26 years old. He was the heir to one of New York's most powerful organized crime families, and I was a nurse working the night shift at Mount Sinai Hospital. We met when his uncle was brought in after a shooting. Stephen stayed by his bedside for 3 days, never sleeping, barely eating, just watching over family, and I was assigned to the case, checked vitals every hour, changed bandages, administered medication, and somewhere in those 3 days, Stephen started talking to me, asking me questions, looking at me like I was more than just the nurse, like I was someone who mattered. He pursued me for 8 months, flowers at the hospital, coffee waiting for me after shifts, text messages asking about my day, dinners at restaurants I could only dream of affording. He was charming, attentive, generous, and I fell for it. Fell for him, fell for the fantasy that a man like Stephen Castellano could love a woman like me. A girl from Queens who put herself through nursing school, who lived in a studio apartment with second-hand furniture, who had student loans and a beat-up Honda and no connections to the world he came from. His family was less enthusiastic. His mother Maria barely spoke to me at our first meeting. His sister Mercy looked at me like I was something temporary, something Stephen would tire of eventually, and his underboss, a man named Kenny Richardson, watched me with calculating eyes that made me feel like I was being evaluated for weaknesses, for vulnerabilities, for ways I could be used or eliminated. But Stephen insisted, told his family I was different, told them I made him happy, told them he was going to marry me whether they approved or not, and eventually they accepted it, or at least pretended to. His mother kissed my cheek at the wedding and told me to take care of her son. His sister gave me a tight smile and said welcome to the family. And Kenny stood beside Stephen as best man, his expression unreadable. The first year of marriage was good, better than good. Stephen was loving, protective, gave me everything I could want. Moved me into a penthouse in Tribeca, bought me clothes and jewelry, told me I never had to work again unless I wanted to, and I did want to. I loved nursing. Loved helping people, loved the feeling of being useful. But Stephen discouraged it, said it was not safe, said people might target me to get to him. Said I should focus on our life together, on starting a family, on being his wife. Starting a family, that was something Stephen talked about constantly. From the first month of our marriage, he wanted children, wanted an heir, wanted to build a legacy. He would talk about it over dinner. Describe the kind of father he would be, the things he would teach his son, the empire he would pass down. And I wanted it too. Wanted to give him that, wanted to be a mother. Wanted to build something permanent with this man I loved. But months passed and nothing happened. 6 months, 8 months, a year, and Stephen started getting anxious. Started asking if I had been to a doctor, started suggesting we get tested, started looking at me with questions in his eyes, questions about whether I was the problem, whether I was broken, whether I could give him what he needed. I went to my doctor, got tested, did all the blood work and exams, and everything came back normal, perfectly normal. I was healthy, fertile, capable of having children. The problem was not me. And I told Stephen that, showed him the results, waited for him to get tested too, to rule out any issues on his side. But Stephen refused, said he did not need to be tested. Said there was nothing wrong with him, said we just needed to be patient, needed to try harder, needed to stop stressing about it. And I believed him. I trusted him. I accepted his explanation even though something about it felt wrong, felt incomplete, felt like he was hiding something. 2 years into our marriage, 2 years of trying, 2 years of disappointment and tension and unspoken accusations, I started noticing things, small things that did not quite add up. The way Stephen would change the subject whenever I suggested he see a doctor, the way his mother would look at me with something like pity when the topic of children came up, the way Kenny would watch Stephen during family dinners when someone asked about grandchildren, like he knew something I did not. And then one night I could not sleep. Stephen was out handling business, something he did often, something I had learned not to ask about, and I was alone in our penthouse, restless, anxious, unable to stop thinking about why we were not getting pregnant, why Stephen refused to get tested, why his family looked at me the way they did. I went into Stephen's study, the one room in our home he kept locked, the one space he told me was private, off limits for business only, but I had a key, had found it months ago, hidden in his dresser, had kept it, had waited for a moment when I might need it. I opened the study, turned on the desk lamp, started looking through drawers, through files, not knowing what I was searching for, just knowing that something was wrong, something was being kept from me, something that explained why my husband refused to address the one thing we both wanted most. I found the medical records in a locked drawer. Stephen's medical records dated from 5 years before we met, from a hospital in Philadelphia, and I read them, read every page, read the diagnosis that explained everything, that changed everything, that made me understand exactly why Stephen would never get tested, why he avoided doctors, why he changed the subject every time I brought it up. Stephen was sterile, completely, permanently, irreversibly sterile. The result of complications from mumps when he was 19, bilateral orchitis they called it, inflammation that destroyed his ability to produce viable sperm. He could never father children, would never be able to give me a baby, would never be able to produce an heir. And he knew, he had known for years, had known before we got married, had known every time he talked about starting a family, had known every time he let me believe the problem might be me. I sat in that study for an hour, maybe longer, holding those medical records, feeling my entire world tilt, feeling betrayed in a way I did not have words for, because Stephen had lied, had let me go to doctors, had let me question my own body, had let me feel broken when he knew the whole time that he was the one who could not have children. I put the records back exactly when I found them, locked the drawer, left the study, went back to bed, and when Stephen came home at 3 a.m, crawled into bed beside me, pulled me close, I said nothing, did nothing. Just lay there in the dark wondering what kind of man does this, what kind of husband lets his wife suffer in silence while protecting his own secret, his own shame, his own inability to be honest about something so fundamental. The next morning I called in sick to a shift I had picked up, told the hospital I was not feeling well, which was true in ways that had nothing to do with physical illness, and I made an appointment with a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer, not yet, just someone who could tell me what my options were, what rights I had, what would happen if I left Stephen, if I walked away from this marriage built on lies. The lawyer, a woman named Janet Morrison, listened to my story, took notes, asked questions, and then she told me something that made my blood run cold. She told me that as Stephen's wife, I had signed a prenuptial agreement, one that was ironclad, one that gave me almost nothing if I left the marriage, $50,000, enough to start over but not enough to matter, not enough to make leaving easy. But more than that, Janet told me that women who left the Castellano family did not just leave with nothing. They left with targets on their backs. They became liabilities, people who knew too much, people who might talk, people who needed to be managed, silenced, eliminated. She told me to be very careful, to think very hard before I made any decisions, to understand that leaving Stephen might mean more than just divorce. It might mean my life. I left that meeting feeling trapped, feeling like the walls were closing in, feeling like I had discovered a lie only to realize I was living in a cage I could not escape, and I went home, went back to the penthouse, went back to playing the role of devoted wife while my mind raced through possibilities, through options, through ways I might survive this. Where are you watching from right now? Are you understanding what she felt? That moment when you realize the person you married is a stranger, hit subscribe because this story is about to get darker. about to reveal something nobody expected. 3 weeks after I found Stephen's medical records, 3 weeks after I learned my husband was sterile, 3 weeks after I accepted that my marriage was built on a fundamental lie, I started feeling sick, nauseous in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons, sensitive to smells that never bothered me before, and I knew before I took the test, I knew what this meant, what this would reveal, what this would prove. I bought 3 pregnancy tests, took them all. Watched as each one came back positive, 2 lines, clear, undeniable, I was pregnant, approximately 5 weeks based on my cycle. And the father could not be Stephen because Stephen could not father children. Stephen was sterile. Stephen's medical records proved it. I sat on the bathroom floor holding those positive tests, and I felt everything at once. Joy because I was pregnant, because I was going to be a mother, because this was something I wanted desperately, and terror because this pregnancy proved I had been unfaithful, proved I had cheated on my husband, proved I deserved whatever punishment Stephen would deliver when he found out. Except I had not been unfaithful, I had never cheated on Stephen, had never even looked at another man, had been completely loyal despite everything I had discovered, despite the lies, despite the betrayal. I had done nothing wrong, which meant the pregnancy made no sense, was medically impossible, was something I could not explain. Unless Stephen's medical records were wrong, unless the diagnosis was incorrect, unless somehow despite what those documents said, despite what the doctors told him years ago, Stephen could father children. But that seemed unlikely, seemed impossible, seemed like wishful thinking from a woman desperate to make sense of a situation that made no sense. I hid the pregnancy tests, wrapped them in tissue paper, buried them at the bottom of the bathroom trash under other garbage, and I said nothing, told no one, kept the secret close because I needed time. Needed to think, needed to figure out what this meant before I told anyone, before I faced the consequences, before my life fell apart. I made an appointment with my old doctor, the one I had seen before I married Stephen, the one who worked at a clinic in Queens far from Stephen's world, far from anyone who might report back to him. And I went alone, told Stephen I was having lunch with a friend, told him I would be back by dinner, told him another lie to cover the truth I was desperately trying to understand. The doctor confirmed what I already knew. I was pregnant, healthy, everything looked normal, and when I asked her, when I told her about Stephen's medical records, about the diagnosis of sterility, about the impossibility of this pregnancy, she looked at me with kind eyes and said, "Priska, medical records can be faked, diagnoses can be falsified. If your husband wanted you to believe he could not have children, if he had reasons to hide his fertility, he could have created false medical records. It happens more often than you think." "Why would he do that?" I asked. "Why would Stephen want me to believe he was sterile when he was not? Why would he let me suffer through 2 years of trying, 2 years of thinking something was wrong with me, 2 years of hoping for something he could give me all along?" "I do not know," the doctor said, "but you should ask him, you should tell him about the pregnancy, see how he reacts, because his reaction will tell you everything you need to know about why he lied." I left that appointment more confused than when I arrived, more questions than answers, more fear than certainty, because if Stephen had lied about being sterile, if he had faked medical records, if he had deliberately let me believe he could not father children, then why? What purpose did it serve? What was he hiding? What was he protecting? I decided to wait, to watch, to see if Stephen revealed anything. Any clue that might explain this, any slip that might give me the truth, because confronting him directly felt dangerous, felt like it might trigger something I was not prepared to handle, might expose me to risks I was not ready to face. 2 days after my doctor's appointment, 2 days after learning that Stephen might have faked his sterility, 2 days after deciding to wait and watch, I overheard a conversation that explained everything, that revealed the truth in the most devastating way possible. Stephen was in his study with Kenny. I was supposed to be out shopping, but I came home early, headache, fatigue. Early pregnancy symptoms that I was hiding from everyone, and I heard their voices through the study door, low, serious, discussing something that made me stop, made me listen, made me pull out my phone and start recording because some instinct told me I needed evidence, needed proof, needed documentation of whatever I was about to hear. "The family is getting impatient," Kenny said, his voice measured, careful. "They want to know when you are going to produce an heir, when Priska is going to get pregnant. Your mother asks me about it constantly. Wants to know if there is a problem, wants to know if you need to consider other options." Tell them to be patient, Stephen said, and I heard the irritation in his voice, the frustration. Tell them these things take time. Tell them we are trying. Tell them it will happen when it happens. But it will not happen, Kenny said, and his voice was quiet now, almost gentle. We both know it will not happen, not with Priska, not with anyone. You have known that since you were 19, since the diagnosis, since the doctors told you the damage was permanent. I know, Stephen snapped, and I heard something in his voice I had never heard before, something vulnerable, something broken. I know I cannot father children, I have known for years, but I cannot tell the family, cannot admit that the Castellano line ends with me, cannot face my mother's disappointment or the organization's judgment. So I married Priska. I chose someone outside the life, someone who would not question, someone who would take the blame when children did not come. Someone I could eventually replace without causing too much disruption. Replace, Kenny said. You are planning to divorce her. Eventually, Stephen said, in a few more years, once it becomes clear that she cannot give me children. Once the family accepts that she is the problem, I will divorce her quietly, marry someone else, repeat the process, keep the focus on the wives rather than on me, keep my secret safe, keep my position secure. And what if she finds out, Kenny asked. What if Priska discovers the truth? Discovers that you are the one who cannot have children? Discovers that you have been lying to her for years? She will not, Stephen said, with absolute confidence, with complete certainty. Priska is not sophisticated enough to question me, not connected enough to investigate, not brave enough to confront me. She is exactly what I needed her to be. Simple, trusting, easy to manipulate. She will never know the truth because she will never think to look for it. I stood outside that study door, my phone recording every word, my hand on my stomach where Stephen's child was growing, Stephen's impossible, medically miraculous child, and I understood everything. I understood that my husband was a liar, that he had married me as a scapegoat, that he planned to discard me when his lie became unsustainable, that he had never loved me, had only used me. But I also understood something else, something that changed everything, something that gave me power Stephen did not know I had. I understood that I was pregnant with his child, that despite what he believed, despite what the doctors told him, despite the medical records that said he was sterile, he had somehow fathered a baby, and that pregnancy, that impossible pregnancy, was proof that Stephen was wrong, that his secret was based on outdated information, that everything he had built his lie on was false. I backed away from the study door, silent, careful, left the penthouse again, went to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, and I listened to the recording, listened to Stephen admit he married me to take the blame for his sterility, listened to him plan my eventual replacement, listened to him dismiss me as too simple to ever discover the truth, and I felt something inside me harden, something that had been soft become sharp, something that had been trusting become calculating. I called Janet Morrison, the lawyer I had consulted weeks earlier, told her I had new information, told her I needed to see her immediately, told her everything had changed. In her office, I played the recording, showed her the positive pregnancy tests, explained the medical records I had found, explained the impossible situation I was in, pregnant with the child of a man who believed he was sterile, married to someone who planned to divorce me and blame me for his own infertility, trapped in a family that would see me as a liability the moment I tried to leave. Janet listened to everything, took notes, asked questions. And then she looked at me with something like admiration and said, "Priska, you have something very valuable here. You have proof that Stephen lied. You have evidence of his deception, and you have his child, a child he does not know exists, a child that proves his medical records are either outdated or falsified, a child that changes everything. What do I do with it?" I asked. "How do I use this? How do I protect myself and my baby from a man who sees us as disposable?" "You document everything," Janet said. "You gather every piece of evidence you can find. You prepare for the moment when you will need to reveal what you know, and you do not tell Stephen about the pregnancy. Not yet. Not until you are ready. Not until you have secured your position, because that pregnancy is leverage, is power, is the one thing Stephen wants, but does not know he has. Over the next 3 months, while my pregnancy progressed, while my body changed in ways I hid under loose clothing and careful positioning, I became a different person. I documented everything, recorded conversations, photographed documents, gathered evidence of Stephen's lies, his plans, his complete disregard for me as anything other than a tool to protect his reputation. Hiding the pregnancy was harder than I expected. Morning sickness hit me hard. Brutal waves of nausea that left me weak and shaking, and I had to time my bathroom trips carefully, had to make excuses when I could not eat at family dinners, had to blame stress or a stomach bug or anything other than the truth growing inside me. Stephen's mother started making comments about my weight, about how I looked pale, about whether I was taking care of myself, and I would smile and nod and promise to eat more, to rest more, to take better care, all while hiding the pregnancy that would have answered all her questions, that would have given her the grandchild she desperately wanted. I started wearing looser clothes, layers, oversized sweaters even when it was warm, baggy dresses that hid my changing shape, and when Stephen commented, when he asked why I was dressing differently, I told him I was going through a style change, told him I wanted to be more comfortable, told him anything that would keep him from looking too closely, from noticing what I was hiding. The pregnancy cravings were intense, specific. I wanted pickles and ice cream at 2 a.m, wanted spicy food that made me sweat, wanted sour candies by the handful, and I had to hide these cravings too, had to eat in secret, had to make midnight trips to 24-hour stores where no one would recognize me, where I could buy the strange combinations without questions. I gained weight despite my efforts to hide it, not much. Maybe 10 pounds by the 3rd month, but enough that my clothes fit differently. Enough that I had to be careful about what I wore, how I positioned myself, how I moved through spaces. I became hyper-aware of my body, of how it was changing, of what it might reveal if I was not careful. The fatigue was overwhelming. Pregnancy exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I needed naps in the afternoon, could barely keep my eyes open after dinner, wanted to sleep 12 hours a night, and I had to hide this too. Had to push through the exhaustion, had to maintain my usual schedule, had to keep up the performance of being normal when everything about my body was screaming that I was not. I downloaded pregnancy apps, tracked my baby's development in secret, read articles about what to expect, about how to stay healthy, about warning signs I should watch for, and I did it all alone, without Stephen, without his family, without the support system most pregnant women have, because revealing the pregnancy before I was ready felt too dangerous. Felt like giving up the only leverage I had. My baby was growing, developing, becoming more real every day. And I felt kicks starting around 16 weeks, little flutters that became stronger, became definite movements, became proof that this tiny human was alive, was healthy, was depending on me to protect them, and that responsibility, that weight, made me more determined, more careful, more strategic about every choice I made. I found more medical records, older ones, from when Stephen was first diagnosed, and I found something the newer records did not mention. I found a note from a doctor suggesting that while Stephen's sperm count was severely reduced, while natural conception would be difficult, it was not impossible. Unlikely, but not medically impossible. The diagnosis was not sterility, but severe subfertility, and someone, maybe Stephen, maybe someone else, had exaggerated the diagnosis in later documents, had turned difficult into impossible, had created a lie that served some purpose I was still trying to understand. The medical terminology was complex, technical, but I was a nurse. I understood what I was reading. I understood that Stephen's condition meant he had a significantly reduced chance of fathering children naturally, maybe 10% or less, but not zero, not impossible, not the absolute sterility he claimed. And I realized that Stephen had either misunderstood his diagnosis or deliberately exaggerated it, had taken a difficult situation and turned it into an impossible one to serve his own purposes. I researched subfertility, read medical journals, consulted with fertility specialists anonymously, asked questions in online forums using fake names, and I learned that men with Stephen's condition sometimes did father children naturally. It was rare. It required luck and timing, and sometimes multiple attempts, but it happened. It was medically documented. It was real. And that meant my pregnancy made sense, was not impossible, was just extremely unlikely, a 1 in 100 chance that somehow, against the odds, had happened. I also discovered that Stephen was not just planning to divorce me, he was planning to have me declared mentally unstable, unfit. A woman who could not handle the pressure of being a Castellano wife. He had already spoken to doctors, to therapists, to people who would testify that I was fragile, that I needed help, that I should be institutionalized for my own protection, and once I was locked away, once I was discredited, he could divorce me without anyone questioning why, could move on to his next wife without damage to his reputation. The evidence of this plan was in emails I found on Stephen's computer. Messages to a psychiatrist named Dr. Marcus Holland discussing my supposed symptoms, my alleged depression, my fabricated anxiety attacks. Stephen was building a medical history for me that did not exist, was creating documentation of mental illness I did not have, was preparing to have me committed based on lies he was carefully constructing. I photographed every email, every document, every piece of evidence that proved what Stephen was planning, and I added it to my growing file, my insurance policy, my protection against the man who was supposed to love me but was instead planning my destruction. The plan was meticulous, careful, designed to protect Stephen while destroying me. He would express concern about my mental health to his family, would suggest I was becoming unstable, would paint himself as the caring husband trying to help his struggling wife, and then, when I was vulnerable, when I had been isolated and discredited, he would have me evaluated by Dr. Holland, who would diagnose me with severe mental illness, would recommend immediate hospitalization, would sign the papers that would lock me away. And once I was institutionalized, once I was out of the way, Stephen would divorce me quietly, would take control of any assets I might claim, would erase me from his life like I never existed, would move on to the next woman who would serve as his scapegoat until she too became inconvenient. I documented all of it, every conversation, every meeting, every piece of evidence that proved what he was planning, and I waited for the right moment, waited for my pregnancy to progress far enough that it could not be hidden, waited for Stephen to make a move that would give me the opening I needed to reveal everything, to change the power dynamic, to protect myself and my unborn child. I also started building my own support network, carefully, quietly, people Stephen did not know about, people who could help me if things went wrong. I reconnected with old friends from nursing school, women who had moved to different cities, who had no connection to Stephen's world, who could provide refuge if I needed to disappear. I opened bank accounts Stephen did not know about, transferred small amounts of money, nothing large enough to be noticed, but enough that over months I built a safety net, emergency funds that could support me if I needed to run, if I needed to start over, if the situation became too dangerous to stay. I researched women's shelters, safe houses, organizations that helped people escape abusive relationships, and I made contacts, established relationships, let them know I might need help someday, might need to disappear quickly, might need protection from a powerful family that would come looking for me. I created alternate identities, fake ID, backup documents, passports with different names. All the tools I would need if I had to become someone else, if I had to leave Prisca Castellano behind and start over as someone new, somewhere Stephen could never find me. The pregnancy made everything more complicated, more urgent, because now it was not just me I was protecting, it was my child. This innocent life that depended on me to make the right choices, to keep them safe, to ensure they had a future that was not defined by their father's lies. I thought about running, about taking my evidence and my emergency funds and disappearing before Stephen could execute his plan, before I was forced to reveal the pregnancy, before things became even more dangerous. But running meant giving up everything, meant living in fear forever, meant my child would grow up without knowing their father, without the resources and protection that came with being a Castellano, and I was not sure I could do that, could deprive my baby of that legacy, even if that legacy came with risks. So I decided to wait, to document, to prepare for every possible outcome, running, staying, exposing Stephen, making a deal. I prepared for all of it, made sure I had options, made sure I was not trapped, made sure that whatever happened next, I would be the one making the choice, not Stephen, not his family, not circumstances I could not control. 4 months into my pregnancy, 4 months of hiding, 4 months of gathering evidence, 4 months of playing the devoted wife while preparing for war, Stephen's mother Maria invited us to a family dinner, a formal event, the kind where business was discussed, where alliances were formed, where futures were decided. And I knew this was my moment. This was when I would stop hiding, when I would reveal the pregnancy, when I would see how Stephen reacted, what he believed, whether he would accept this child as his or accuse me of infidelity. I chose my outfit carefully, a dress that was fitted but not tight, elegant but not revealing. Something that would show my pregnancy to anyone who was looking, to anyone who knew what to look for, but would not be so obvious that it would dominate the conversation. I wanted the reveal to be subtle at first, controlled, strategic. I wanted to watch people's reactions, wanted to see what Stephen would do when faced with the impossible, his child growing inside the wife he planned to discard. I wore a fitted dress, not tight enough to be obvious, but fitted enough that if someone was looking, if someone was paying attention, they might notice the small curve of my stomach, the slight change in my body, and I waited. I waited to see if anyone would notice, if anyone would comment, if anyone would give me the opening I needed. Halfway through dinner, Stephen's sister Mercy looked at me, really looked at me, and her eyes went to my stomach, and I saw recognition, saw understanding, saw her realize what I had been hiding, and she leaned over to her mother, whispered something, and Maria's eyes went to my stomach too, and the entire table went quiet, everyone staring, everyone waiting. "Priska," Maria said, her voice careful, neutral, "are you pregnant?" I looked at Stephen, watched his face, watched confusion turn to shock, turn to something like hope, and I said, "Yes, I am 4 months pregnant." The table erupted. Congratulations, joy, celebration, Stephen's mother crying happy tears, his sister hugging me, Kenny raising his glass in a toast, and Stephen looked like someone had given him everything he ever wanted. He grabbed my hand, pulled me close, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Why did you not tell me? Why did you wait so long?" "I wanted to be sure," I said, "wanted to make it past the first trimester, wanted to know everything was okay before I got your hopes up." Stephen smiled, and I saw relief in that smile, saw vindication, saw him believing that this pregnancy proved he was not sterile, that the medical records were wrong, that he could father children after all, that his secret was safe, that his lie could continue. But I also saw something else. I saw him calculating, saw him wondering, saw the question forming that he did not ask out loud, the question about whether this baby was his, whether I had been faithful, whether this pregnancy was proof of his fertility or proof of my betrayal. That night, after we got home from the dinner, after the celebration died down, Stephen pulled me into his study, closed the door, and looked at me with hard eyes and asked the question I knew was coming. "Is the baby mine, Priska? Is this my child, or did you cheat on me? Did you betray me? Did you get pregnant by someone else?" I looked at him, this man who had lied to me for years, who had planned to have me institutionalized, who had married me as a scapegoat for his own infertility, and I said, "The baby is yours, Stephen. I have never been unfaithful. I have never even looked at another man. This child is absolutely, definitely, medically yours." "How is that possible?" Stephen asked, and I heard the fear in his voice now, the confusion, the desperation to understand how this could happen when he believed it could not. "Because you are not sterile," I said, pulling out the medical records I had found, the old ones, the ones that told the truth. "Because your original diagnosis was not sterility. It was severe subfertility, difficult but not impossible. And somehow, against the odds, we conceived naturally. This baby is your child, Stephen, your heir, your legacy, everything you wanted." Stephen read the old medical records, and I watched his face change, watched realization dawn, watched him understand that he had been wrong, that he had built years of lies on a misunderstanding, that he had married me to take the blame for something that was never actually impossible, just unlikely. But then his expression changed again, became suspicious, became calculating, became cold, and he said, "How did you find these records, Priska? How did you get into my study? How did you know to look?" I did not answer. I just pulled out my phone, pulled up the recording I had made 3 months ago, the recording of Stephen and Kenny discussing his plans for me, discussing my eventual replacement, discussing how simple and trusting I was, how I would never discover the truth, and I played it. I let Stephen hear his own words, let him understand that I knew everything, that I had known for months, that I was not as simple as he thought. Stephen's face went pale, then red, then pale again, and he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like he was realizing that the woman standing in front of him was not the woman he married, was not the simple Trusking girl from Queens, was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice quiet now, careful. "What are you going to do with this? Are you going to expose me? Are you going to destroy me? Are you going to destroy me? Are you going to take my child and disappear?" "I want the truth," I said. "I want to know why you lied. Why you married me planning to discard me, why you were going to have me declared unstable, why you thought I was disposable, and then I want to decide what happens next, whether I stay, whether I leave, whether I protect you or destroy you." Stephen sat down, put his head in his hands. And for a long moment he said nothing, and when he finally spoke, his voice was broken, vulnerable, honest in a way I had never heard before. "I was 19 when I got sick," he said. "Mumps, complications. The doctors told me my fertility was severely compromised, that I probably would not be able to father children naturally, and I was devastated, terrified, because in my family, in my world, a man who cannot produce an heir is worthless, is weak, is disposable. So I took their probably and turned it into definitely. I took their unlikely and turned it into impossible. I created medical records that said I was completely sterile, so that when I failed to produce children, when I could not give my family what they demanded, I could blame it on medical impossibility rather than on my own inadequacy. And you married me to take the blame," I said, "to make everyone believe the problem was me, not you." "Yes," Stephen said, "and I know that makes me a terrible person. I know I used you. I know I planned to discard you. But I was protecting myself, protecting my position, protecting my reputation, and you were supposed to be temporary, expendable, someone who would not matter when I moved on." "But I am pregnant," I said, "with your child, your heir, the thing you wanted most, the thing you believed you could never have. What happens now, Stephen? What do you do with the wife you planned to discard who is carrying your legacy?" Stephen looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes, saw genuine emotion, saw something that might have been regret or might have been relief. "I do not know," he said. "I do not know what to do. I do not know if I deserve this, if I deserve you, if I deserve the child you are carrying. All I know is that I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I did, for what I planned, for how I treated you." "Sorry is not enough," I said. "Sorry does not undo the lies, does not erase the betrayal, does not make me forget that you were planning to have me institutionalized, that you saw me as disposable, that you never actually loved me." "You are right," Stephen said. "Sorry is not enough. Nothing I say will be enough, but I am asking anyway. I am asking you to stay, to give me a chance to be the husband I should have been, to be the father our child deserves, to build something real instead of something based on lies. Are you still with me? Because this is where everything changes. This is where Priska has to decide what kind of future she wants. Hit subscribe because the ending will surprise you. We'll show you that sometimes the most powerful choice is the one nobody expects." I looked at Stephen, this man who had lied to me, used me, planned to destroy me. This man who was also the father of my child, the person I had loved before I knew the truth, the complicated, broken human being who had just admitted everything, and I made a decision that surprised even me, a decision that would change both our lives. "I will stay," I said, "but not because I forgive you, not because I trust you, not because I believe your apology. I will stay because this child deserves a father, because walking away means losing everything, because fighting you means risking my life, but I will stay on my terms, with my conditions, with protections in place that ensure you can never hurt me again." "What conditions?" Stephen asked. "First," I said, "you sign a new prenuptial agreement, one that gives me half of everything if we divorce, one that ensures our child inherits regardless of what happens between us, one that protects me legally and financially from any attempt to discard me or institutionalize me. Second, you tell your family the truth. You tell them about your subfertility, about the medical records, about how this pregnancy is a miracle, about how you were wrong to believe you could never father children. You take responsibility for the lies. You clear my name. Third," I said, "you go to therapy, real therapy, with someone who specializes in helping people who grew up in organized crime, someone who can help you understand why you lie, why you manipulate, why you see people as disposable, because I need to know if you can change, if you can become someone worthy of being this child's father. And fourth," I said, pulling out my phone, "I keep the evidence, I keep the recordings, I keep the medical records, and if you ever betray me again, if you ever try to hurt me, if you ever give me reason to believe my safety or our child's safety is at risk, I release everything. I expose you, I destroy you, and I disappear with our child to a place you will never find us." Stephen looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him weighing his options, saw him calculating whether he could agree to these terms, whether he could accept this loss of control, whether he could live with a wife who had power over him, and finally he nodded. "I agree," he said. "All of it. I agree to everything." We went to a lawyer the next day, not Janet, someone neutral, someone who specialized in complex prenuptial agreements, And we drafted the new contract, signed it, had it motorized, made it legally binding, and I walked out of that office with protections I never had before, with security I never thought possible, with power. Stephen told his family the truth at the next family dinner, admitted his subfertility, explained the medical confusion, took responsibility for years of secrecy, and I watched his mother's face, watched her understand that her son had been lying, that he had married me under false pretenses, that he had planned to blame me for his own issues, and instead of anger, instead of disappointment, I saw relief. I saw her realize that her son could father children after all, that the Castellano line would continue, that the heir she wanted was growing inside me. Maria apologized to me, said she was sorry for any coldness, for any judgment, for assuming I was the problem, and she promised that from now on I would be treated as family, as the mother of the future Castellano heir, as someone valuable, as someone protected. Stephen started therapy, reluctantly at first, showing up to sessions with defensive body language, arms crossed, refusing to engage with the process, refusing to admit he needed help, but his therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, was patient, experienced with men from organized crime families, understood the specific psychological patterns that developed in that world, the ways power and violence and secrecy warped normal human connection. The first few months of therapy were brutal. Stephen would come home angry, defensive, insisting that Dr. Chen did not understand him, did not understand his world, did not understand that the things he did were necessary for survival. But Dr. Chen kept pushing, kept asking questions that made Stephen uncomfortable, kept pointing out patterns he did not want to see, kept holding up mirrors that reflected parts of himself he had spent years hiding. I attended some sessions with him, couples therapy, where we worked through the betrayal, through the lies, through the hurt I carried. And in those sessions I saw Stephen struggle, saw him try to defend himself, try to justify what he did, try to make it seem reasonable, necessary, understandable, but Dr. Chen would not let him hide, would not let him rationalize, would not let him avoid responsibility. You married Priska as a scapegoat, Dr. Chen would say. You planned to blame her for your own infertility. You were going to have her institutionalized to protect your reputation. How do you think that made her feel? How do you think she experiences trust now? How do you think she sleeps next to you knowing what you were capable of planning? And Stephen would squirm, would struggle, would eventually, painfully, admit that he had been wrong, that he had hurt me, that he had prioritized his own protection over my well-being, over my dignity, over my right to be treated as a human being instead of a tool. The breakthrough came about 6 months into therapy. Stephen broke down in a session, really broke down, crying in a way I had never seen, admitting that he had been terrified his entire life, terrified of being seen as weak, terrified of disappointing his family, terrified of being disposable, and that fear had driven him to hurt people, to manipulate them, to treat them as means to ends rather than as people worthy of respect. I am so sorry, he said, looking at me through tears. I am so sorry for what I did to you, for what I planned, for how I made you feel. You deserved better. You deserved honesty. You deserved a husband who loved you enough to be vulnerable with you. And I was too broken, too scared, too damaged to give you that. That session was a turning point. Stephen started engaging with therapy more seriously, started doing the homework Dr. Chen assigned, started reading books about emotional intelligence and healthy relationships and breaking cycles of dysfunction, started actually trying to change rather than just going through the motions. Our son was born 6 months later. We named him Michael, after Stephen's father, and the moment Stephen held him, the moment he looked down at this tiny, perfect human being we had created, I saw something break in him, saw walls come down, saw the man I had hoped he could be finally emerge. Stephen looked at Michael and said, I promise you, I promise I will be better than my father was, better than I have been. I promise I will show you what it means to be a good man, not just a powerful one. Stephen was a good father, attentive, protective, present in ways I never expected. He changed diapers, did midnight feedings, sang lullabies in a soft voice I had never heard him use before, and I watched him fall in love with our son, watched him become someone new, someone better, someone worthy of the family we were building. He started working less, delegating more, telling Kenny to handle things so he could be home for dinner, for bath time, for bedtime stories, and his family was shocked, confused, because Castellano men did not prioritize family over business, did not leave meetings early to read to their children, did not choose being present over being powerful. But Stephen did. Stephen made that choice every day, chose to be Michael's father over being the family's golden boy, chose to build a relationship with his son over building his empire, chose to be someone his child could respect over being someone his organization feared. The therapy continued, twice a week for the first year, then once a week, then monthly maintenance sessions, and I saw Stephen change, saw him learn to communicate instead of manipulate, saw him learn to ask for what he needed instead of taking it, saw him learn to be vulnerable instead of always being in control. We had hard conversations about trust, about forgiveness, about whether I could ever truly feel safe with him again, about whether he could ever truly overcome the patterns that had defined him for so long. And Stephen did not run from those conversations, did not shut down, did not defend. He listened, he acknowledged, he took responsibility. I told him about the nightmares I had, dreams where he followed through with his plan, where I was institutionalized, where I lost Michael, where everything I feared came true, and Stephen held me while I cried, apologized again, promised again that he would never hurt me, that he would spend the rest of his life proving I could trust him. He showed me the work he was doing in therapy, shared his journal entries where he processed his feelings, his fears, his understanding of what he had done wrong, and I read them, read his private thoughts, read him admitting things he had never said out loud, read him taking responsibility in ways that felt genuine, that felt real, that felt like actual change. We went on dates, rebuilt our romance, learned to be a couple instead of just co-parents. Instead of just people bound by contracts and threats, Stephen courted me again, brought me flowers, took me to dinner, asked me about my hopes and dreams like he cared about the answer, like my inner life mattered to him. He supported me going back to nursing part-time at first, a few shifts a week at a small clinic where I could help people, where I could use my training, where I could be someone other than Mrs. Castellano, and he did not complain, did not tell me it was dangerous, did not try to control me. He just asked what I needed from him, how he could support me, what would make it easier. I started to see the man I had hoped Stephen could be, the man he was working to become, the man who chose honesty over image, vulnerability over strength, partnership over control, and slowly, carefully, I started to trust him again, started to believe that the changes were real, started to imagine a future where we were actually happy together. But I never forgot, never let my guard down completely, never destroyed the evidence I had gathered, because I understood that people can change, can grow, can become better versions of themselves. But I also understood that some patterns run deep, that some instincts never fully disappear, that vigilance is the price of safety. And I owed that vigilance to myself, to Michael, to the life I was trying to build. I checked in with Janet Morrison regularly, my lawyer, made sure the prenuptial agreement remained valid, made sure my protections stayed in place, made sure Stephen understood that while I was choosing to stay, while I was choosing to rebuild, I still had the power to leave, still had the evidence to destroy him, still had options if things went wrong. Stephen knew about this, knew I was maintaining my insurance policy, and instead of being angry, instead of feeling threatened, he told me he understood, told me it was smart, told me he would do the same thing if their positions were reversed, told me he was grateful I was careful because it meant I was taking care of myself, taking care of our son, protecting the people he loved most. 3 years after Michael was born, 3 years of carefully rebuilt trust. 3 years of Stephen proving he could be honest, could be vulnerable, could be the husband and father we needed him to be. We had another child, a daughter we named Mercy after Stephen's sister, and our family felt complete, felt real, felt like something I could believe in. Mercy's birth was different from Michael's. Easier, less complicated, and Stephen was there the whole time, held my hand through labor, cut the umbilical cord, cried when he held her, told me I was amazing, told me he was grateful, told me he loved me in a voice that sounded true, that sounded earned, that sounded like he meant it. We baptized both children in the family church, surrounded by Castellanos who had accepted me, who treated me as one of them, who respected me not just as Stephen's wife but as Michael and Mercy's mother, as the woman who had saved Stephen from himself, as someone valuable in my own right. Maria became a devoted grandmother, came over weekly to see the children, brought gifts, told stories about Stephen as a child, built relationships with Michael and Mercy that were genuine, warm, full of love, and she apologized to me again, told me she was sorry for ever doubting me, for ever making me feel unwelcome, for ever treating me as temporary. Mercy, Stephen's sister, became an ally, a friend. Someone I could talk to about the challenges of being married into this family. Someone who understood the pressure, the expectations, the ways you had to navigate power dynamics while maintaining your sense of self. We had coffee together regularly, shared advice about parenting, about marriage, about survival. Kenny remained professional but respectful, treated me as Stephen's equal, consulted me on family business decisions that might affect our children, acknowledged that I had power in this family, that my voice mattered, that dismissing me would be a mistake, and I appreciated that acknowledgement, that recognition that I was not just Stephen's wife. I was my own person with my own strength. Stephen never betrayed me again, never lied about anything significant, never gave me reason to doubt him or fear him. He kept his promises, honored the prenuptial agreement, continued therapy even after Dr. Chen said he could stop, built a relationship with me based on honesty instead of manipulation, and slowly, carefully, I started to forgive him, started to believe that the man he had become was genuine, started to love him again in a way that felt earned rather than naive, that felt chosen rather than trapped, that felt like partnership rather than performance. But sometimes, late at night when I am feeding Mercy or checking on Michael, when Stephen is sleeping beside me peaceful and vulnerable, I think about that moment in his study, that moment when I overheard him planning my disposal, that moment when I realized the man I married saw me as disposable, and I remember what he was capable of, what he planned, what he would have done if I had not discovered the truth. And I am grateful I hid that pregnancy test, grateful I waited, grateful I listened through that study door, because if I had not, if I had told Stephen about the pregnancy immediately, if I had trusted him before I knew the truth, I would have given him power over me, would have made myself vulnerable, would have walked into a trap I might never have escaped, and my children, my beautiful children, might not exist, might have been lost to Stephen's lies, might have become casualties of his need to protect his reputation. I think about alternate timelines sometimes, about what would have happened if I had made different choices, if I had confronted Stephen immediately, if I had run away, if I had exposed him to his family without protecting myself first. And in every scenario I can imagine, in every path I did not take, I see danger, I see pain, I see outcomes that would have destroyed me, that would have cost me everything, that would have left my children fatherless or me powerless or both of us lost to consequences I could not control. The choice to hide that pregnancy test, the choice to gather evidence before revealing what I knew, the choice to build protections before confronting Stephen, those choices saved me, saved my children, saved the possibility of the life we are living now. And I do not regret them. I celebrate them. I acknowledge them as the smartest, most strategic, most important decisions I have ever made. I tell other women my story sometimes, not the details, not the names, but the pattern, the lesson, the understanding that knowledge is power, that evidence is protection, that waiting for the right moment is not weakness, it is strategy, and I watch their faces, watch them understand, watch them realize that they too can be patient, can be careful, can document and prepare and protect themselves before making moves that might cost them everything. Some women tell me I should have left immediately, should have exposed Stephen the moment I discovered his lies, should have prioritized my dignity over my safety, should have chosen the dramatic exit over the strategic negotiation, and I understand that perspective. I respect it. But I also know that leaving might have cost me my life, might have cost my children their father, might have put us all in danger from a family that does not tolerate betrayal, that does not accept losing. The choice to stay, to negotiate, to demand protections and force Stephen to change or lose everything, that choice was mine, was informed by my understanding of the risks, of the reality of leaving a powerful crime family, of what it would take to actually survive. And I made it with my eyes open, with my priorities clear, with my children's safety as my guiding principle. Stephen and I talk about this sometimes, about the path we took, about the choices we made, about whether there could have been another way, and he admits that if I had confronted him immediately, if I had not gathered evidence, if I had not built protections, he probably would have followed through with his plan, would have had me institutionalized, would have discarded me like he intended, because without the leverage West built, without the legal protections I demanded, there would have been no reason for him to change, no consequence for his lies, no incentive to become better. "You saved me from myself," Stephen says sometimes. "You forced me to face what I was becoming, what I was willing to do, what I was planning, and you gave me a choice, change or lose everything. And that choice, that ultimatum, that was what I needed. Because without it I would have kept lying, kept manipulating, kept hurting people to protect myself. I accept that forcing Stephen to choose between honesty and destruction was what created the possibility of change. That giving him consequences was what motivated transformation. That my strategic approach was not just about protecting myself. It was about creating the conditions where Stephen could become someone better, someone worthy of being my husband, of being our children's father, of being a man his family could respect for reasons beyond fear. Our marriage is not perfect. No marriage is. We still have conflicts, still disagree about parenting decisions, still frustrate each other with different communication styles, different priorities, different ways of seeing the world. But we have tools now. We have therapy techniques. We have honest communication patterns. We have a foundation of trust that was rebuilt brick by brick over years of hard work. And that foundation holds, supports us, allows us to navigate challenges without destroying each other. I work part-time at the clinic now, 3 shifts a week, and I love it. Love helping patients, love using my nursing skills, love being someone other than just Stephen's wife, just Michael and Mercy's mother, just a Castellano. I am Prisca again, the woman I was before I married into this family. The woman who worked night shifts and put herself through school and helped people because she wanted to make a difference. And Stephen supports this, encourages it, tells me he is proud of me, tells our children that their mother is a nurse who helps people, who makes the world better, who has value beyond her role in the family. We travel sometimes, family vacations, to places that are safe, that are beautiful, that give our children experiences outside the bubble of organized crime, outside the intensity of New York, outside the legacy they were born into. We take them to beaches and mountains and museums and parks, and we try to give them normal childhoods, as normal as possible given who their father is, given the family they belong to, given the reality we cannot completely escape. Michael asks questions sometimes about what Daddy does for work, about why some people are scared of Grandma Maria, about why Uncle Kenny always has men with him, and Stephen and I navigate these questions carefully, honestly but age-appropriately. We do not lie to our children, but we do not burden them with full truth either. We give them information they can handle, understanding they can process, honesty that protects them rather than exposes them. Mercy is too young for these questions yet, but they will come, and when they do, Stephen and I will answer them together. We'll help her understand her family, her legacy, her choices, because we want our children to choose who they become, to understand they are not bound by their father's world, by their family's business, by the patterns that defined previous generations. Stephen talks to Michael about having choices, about being able to leave the family business if he wants, about pursuing any career that interests him, about not being forced into a role he did not choose. And I know this is revolutionary in a family like the Castellanos. I know this goes against everything Stephen was taught, everything his father believed, everything the organization expects. But Stephen is trying to break cycles, trying to give his children freedom he never had, trying to be the father he needed instead of the father he had. This is the story of how I hid a positive pregnancy test from my Mafia boss husband, how I discovered why he believed he could never have children, how I learned he had married me to take the blame for his infertility, how I gathered evidence and built protections and changed the power dynamic in my marriage. And this is also the story of how sometimes the person you marry is not the person they become, how people can change if given the right incentives, how love can be rebuilt on foundations of honesty after years of lies. So tell me, did Prisca make the right choice staying with Stephen? Should she have left? Should she have exposed him? Should she have taken her evidence and disappeared? Or did she do exactly what she needed to do to protect herself and her children? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you stayed until the end, if this story grabbed you, if you understand why Prisca hid that pregnancy test and what it saved her from, subscribe. Subscribe, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Because this story, this complicated story about lies and fertility and leverage and second chances, it matters. It matters because it shows that knowledge is power, that evidence is protection, that the choice to wait, to watch, to document before acting can be the choice that saves your life. Hit subscribe. Let me know where you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever hidden something from someone you loved because revealing it felt too dangerous, because the timing was wrong, because you needed to protect yourself first, because these stories, they connect us. They remind us that we are not alone. They show us that survival sometimes means making choices that look like submission, but are actually strategy. This is the end of Prisca Castellano's story, the woman who hid a positive pregnancy test and discovered her husband's deepest secret. The woman who used that secret to protect herself. The woman who chose to stay and rebuild rather than run and hide. And whether you agree with her choice or not, whether you think she should have left or stayed, I hope you understand that she did what she thought was best, what felt safest, what gave her children the best chance at a stable life. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for staying with Prisca from the beginning to the end. From the hidden pregnancy test to the rebuilt marriage to the family she protected through intelligence and patience and careful strategic thinking. And remember, if you are in a relationship where you sense something is wrong, where your partner is hiding something, where the story does not quite add up, trust your instincts, investigate carefully, document everything, and do not reveal what you know until you have protections in place, until you have evidence secured, until you have a plan for what comes next. Stay safe, protect yourself, trust your instincts. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to ensure their father has to choose between being honest or losing everything. Because that choice, that pressure, that accountability, that is what creates the possibility of change. Subscribe and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. This story is far from over because there are thousands of women like Prisca, thousands of people who discovered secrets about their partners, thousands of survivors who chose complicated strategic paths to safety rather than simple dramatic exits, and their stories deserve to be told, their choices deserve to be understood, their survival deserves to be witnessed. This is the end, but it is also a reminder that you are smarter than people think, stronger than they believe, more capable of protecting yourself than anyone expects. So use that, document everything, trust your instincts, wait for the right moment. And when that moment comes, when you have everything you need, make your move, set your terms, demand your protections, because you deserve safety, you deserve honesty, you deserve a partnership built on truth, not lies. And sometimes, getting that means hiding what you know until you can use it to change everything.